Good morning, and welcome to Columbia University World Leaders Forum. Today we are honored to host His Excellency Sergio Mattarella, President of the Republic of Italy. The President is joined by an impressive delegation of senior officials from the Italian government. The Honorable Vincenzo Amendola, Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, His Excellency Ambassador Claudio Bisogniero and his wife Laura Denise, and the Honorable Natalia Quintanilli, General Counsel of Italy here in New York. Though time does not permit me to recognize each delegation member individually, I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all. I also want to recognize the President's daughter, Laura, who is here with us this morning. Thank you all for visiting Columbia. The President's talk today is titled Leadership in an Age of Change. As we know, the entire world, and perhaps no place more than Europe, is experiencing enormous change occurring at a stunning pace. Economic instability, historic migration, and relentless violence are very much on display in and around the region, with the most recent horrible murder in Egypt of an Italian doctoral student at Cambridge University. At this moment, Italy is playing a pivotal role. According to the United Nations agency that tracks migration, 154,000 refugees arrived in Italy in 2015 after crossing the Mediterranean Sea, almost always under harrowing circumstances. It is a sad fact that last year more than 3,700 people were lost or went missing in the Mediterranean, making it the deadliest year on record. President Mattarella has distinguished himself as a consistent voice for European unity in the face of these challenges. He has spoken out against those who would dissolve ties, close borders, or surrender hard-won civil liberties. He has urged the European Union to look forward while continuing to mine the lessons of its war-torn past. The President has said, quote, "It is only by working together more and not less that we will be up to these challenges." That impulse brought him to the United States this week. On Monday, he met with President Obama to discuss efforts to address the refugee crisis and to combat the Islamic State in Libya. President Mattarella's entry into politics foreshadowed his principled approach. His brother, then governor of Sicily, was assassinated in 1980 for his attempts to liberate the region from the grip of organized crime. Mr. Mattarella took up his brother's work, becoming a member of Parliament and then rising to hold positions as the nation's Minister of Education and Minister of Defense. He later served as a judge on Italy's Constitutional Court. And today we have the opportunity to learn about the President's experience applying these essential values to the challenges of governing. I also want to say that this gathering gives us an opportunity to recognize and to celebrate several historic ties that exist between Columbia and the people, language, and culture of Italy. The undergraduate students in this audience know very well that great Italian works of art and scholarship are the staples of our core curriculum, from Dante to Machiavelli, Michelangelo to Verdi. Just across the street, moreover, stands one of the most beautiful buildings on our campus, the Casa Italiana. Casa Italiana is home to the Italian Academy for Advanced Sciences Studies, a center for the study of Italian literature, science, and culture in New York City. It is a little-known fact that as President of Italy, President Mattarella is also the honorary president of Columbia's Italian Academy. And our new campus in West Harlem, known as Manhattanville, will, I'm sure, have essentially an Italian sensibility, since the master plan and the first 4 buildings are designed by the eminent Italian architect from Genoa, where my wife's family also comes from, Renzo Piano. Please join me in welcoming the President of the Republic of Italy, President Mattarella.
I wish to begin by thanking the President of Columbia University, Professor Bollinger, for having expressed such kind words and for having shown such a great interest and liking for Italy. I do thank him for giving me the opportunity to take the floor today before you on the occasion of my first visit as the President of the Italian Republic to the United States. And I wish to thank and greet Professor Casella and tackle today's topic of discussion. In today's world, the concept of leadership is associated almost automatically with a condition of solitude. The exercise of leadership, in other words, seems to be solitary. Uncommon talents and abilities allow an individual to guide a process, to point to a collective goal in solitude, as it is up to others to recognize and follow that process. This reading is based on the vertically organized power typical of a society in which citizen participation is replaced by processes of periodic delegation, and in which decision-making is shaped by polls that both reflect and influence public opinion. In any liberal democratic system, the difference consists not only in the effectiveness of the results, but also in the way that goals and leaders are chosen. That is to say, there is a twofold process of legitimation that characterizes the exercise of leadership, which is supposed to be the expression of a common conscience. Honoring a leader, therefore, means assuming responsibility for political action undertaken on the basis of shared values and principles. Leadership is not an abstract condition. It consists in knowing how to meet the challenges set forth by reality. At the international level, 2 devastating world wars have helped define a community of values and shape a form of leadership that subsequently have led the 2 shores of the Atlantic to weave a special friendship and forge common long-term views on the great international issues. This community of values was consolidated also thanks to an essential pillar of our relations, the Atlantic Alliance, envisaged and established to assert the values of freedom and democracy. In an international dimension, leadership thus signifies an ongoing commitment to asserting and defending the values that we believe should be at the heart of peaceful coexistence, prosperity, and the progress of humankind, by which I mean both individuals and the social, cultural, religious, and political groups to which individuals belong. Our countries, our family of countries, have developed an approach that has profoundly affected the way international relations are arranged, and that continues to represent the true essence of what we still wish to share with the international community as a whole today. Western leadership makes an indispensable contribution to the management and resolution of the crises that the world is facing with greater frequency and intensity. Yet, that leadership is called upon every day to reaffirm its ongoing commitment to these values, to personify them in a changing and demanding reality, the clearest sign of which is terrorism, ever present in our daily lives. The historic dimensions of migratory flows, and finally, the emergence of new crises and the aggravation of age-old tensions in the Mediterranean region. These are the questions of paramount importance to the United States, to Europe, to Italy. Crises that can and must be overcome on the strength of our values. The ultimate goal, as well as the basis for and limit on our action. In this sense, the illuminating words of George Kennan at the end of his famous long telegram could not be more relevant. He wrote, "Finally, we must have the courage and self-confidence to cling to our own methods and conceptions of human society. After all, the greatest danger that can befall us is, in coping with this problem of Soviet communism, is that we shall allow ourselves to become like those with whom we are coping." These words, despite the changed international context in which we are living, still hold true today. But what we cannot afford is to fight instability by renouncing the fundamental values of our society. To do otherwise might allow us to win a battle or two, gaining a temporary advantage, but in the long run, we will forget and irreparably fail in our fundamental objective: to guarantee to others an equal measure of the liberty, prosperity, and progress that we ourselves can enjoy today, and the right to the pursuit of happiness, so luminously inscribed in the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America in 1776. This is the universe of values that we must preserve for the younger generations, in the hope that they, too, will work to maintain and improve it. Terrorism is the most disruptive threat that our societies are facing. A threat that knows no borders, that is fueled by an irrational, destructive force and a series of insidious anti-values that seem to have been created as the antithesis of the foundations on which our societies are based. No continent is safe from the dangerous spread of this phenomenon, which benefits from the perks and instruments of globalization, and this is an urgent warning to all of us. It is illusory to think that individual countries can defeat this scourge on their own. Harsher laws and controls, together with the preventive and police actions that each nation or group of nations may adopt, can only increase and improve defenses. They do not constitute, however, an authentic solution. To fight such a complex phenomenon, we need, first of all, to work together. and to do so more often and better in order to block the genesis and development of terrorism and prevent it from prospering where our values struggle to be understood and asserted, where respect for human life and dignity is systematically violated. The first aim of terrorism is to make us afraid and subsequently to condition us. We will not allow this. We will always and everywhere defend the achievements of our civilization and the freedom of our life choices. In this sense, the collaboration between the United States and the European Union is an absolute necessity if we are to wage an effective and credible battle. This is a vigilant, trusting, careful collaboration that must always be able to prevent in order not to be left behind, to be too late to address a slippery, insidious threat ready to strike anywhere and everywhere. A threat that is fueled by instability and that exploits war, poverty, and social tensions, and holds hostage too large a percentage of the world's population. Ancient societies are fragmented and are unable to set the foundations for new societies. These, rather than an alleged clash of civilizations, are the main causes for the spread of terrorism and the emergence of Daesh. The threat flourishes wherever there are failed states. But when this does happen, what is doubted and threatened is the model for international relations, born with the Peace of Westphalia. What is endangered is the very possibility of building peace. What Daesh means in concrete terms is the negation of every legal framework in which the rights of the person are safeguarded by the supremacy of law. It denies the rule of law, an instrument that can build relations with other states to achieve together the goal of progress for the sake of all humankind. We have seen the consequences of this savagery before our eyes, in our cities, and in the images of the barbarous executions of defenseless human beings. The refugee phenomenon facing Europe in this period is rooted in the same soil: war, poverty, social tensions. We have not witnessed an event of these proportions since the Second World War. In this case, too, short-sighted considerations of mere domestic policy, walls and barbed wire erected for protection, and, to use a cynical term, to reroute the traffic, will not enable us to manage an event of historic dimensions with no end in sight, not in the next few years. We must not forget that migration is one of the great recurrent events of human history. Fighting it is useless. What we must do instead is govern it. The only possible response is thus a commitment, born from a renewed unity of intent on the part of the international community. And with regard to my country in particular, from closer collaboration between the member states and the institutions of the European Union. As we speak, millions of men, women, and children are crossing Africa on foot, crossing the Middle East on foot, to escape from death, from hunger. The regional organizations, in accordance with the United Nations Charter, are called upon to play an active role. And this is true for humanitarian crises. It is also true for the pursuit and creation of larger areas of prosperity. Europe must be effective in its action, and it has been drafting solutions in recent years that helped it to come out of the most acute phase of the economic and financial crisis unleashed on global markets, which cast doubt on the solidity of the single currency and the cohesion of the Eurozone. Europe must know how to be effective on other fronts as well. The assertion of its identity, and thus of its fundamental values, is the guiding light for every solution. In numerical terms, the migration crisis that has struck Europe is not comparable to phenomena that have taken and are taking place on other parts of the planet. Every year, the United States takes in almost 1 million new foreign citizens who continue to find in it a land in which to realize their hopes in life, at the same time as the country benefits from their presence and grounds its prosperity also in their contribution. Nevertheless, the impact of the migration crisis on the process of integration on the continent is proving to be more problematic than the recent Euro crisis because of the radicalizing effect it is having on domestic public opinion. A radicalization that empowers the forces of populism and their superficially appealing message, often centered on an anti-historical and unrealistic return to nationalisms that, as history has demonstrated, have no future. True leadership is knowing how to meet these challenges. It is my fervent hope that also through the migration crisis, the European Union may be further encouraged to strengthen its cohesion. The decision to update the common policy on asylum and on strengthening external border controls is a step in the right direction. But we will need an even larger dose of leadership from the European heads of state and government to move from emergency solutions to long-term structural improvements that respond effectively to this crisis, cushioning with far-sightedness the possibly destabilizing effects inevitably carried by the migratory phenomenon. And to assure that this is a valid and lasting response, we must not forget that we are dealing with persons whose integrity and dignity it is our moral duty to safeguard. One of the areas in which the European Union, in light of the current international situation, is called upon to show more cohesion and leadership is undoubtedly in foreign policy. And this brings us to the crises unfolding from the Mediterranean to the Middle East. Some signs indicate that here, too, progress is being made, and greater European cohesion can produce positive results. I refer firstly to Libya, where the compactness of European diplomacy around the action of the United Nations, together with the United States, has led to a preliminary agreement for the reconstruction of shared national institutions. This is the first step toward bringing the country of stable,
credible central institutions. Launching effective peace, stability, and development policies means drawing lessons learned from the international community's intervention and then applying them. The dramatic vicissitudes of the Balkans attest to this. The responsibility taken on by the international community, the United Nations, and the European Union have, with difficulty, but successfully, launched a major process of pacification and gradual inclusion in regional bodies of countries emerging from the breakup of the Yugoslavian Federation, thereby offsetting the risk of renewed conflict. These are processes that must be initiated with respect first and foremost for the peoples affected, for the global promotion of democratic values. The crisis has also led the European Union to reopen its strained channels of communication with Turkey. The dialogue between Ankara and Brussels have the purpose of keeping open the prospect of a gradual accession of Turkey into Europe in full compliance with EU standards, and of strengthening our cooperation with a country that is strategic to the stability of the entire area. Lastly, owing to the migration crisis itself, more intense talks have begun between the European Union and the African countries. This dialogue is essential to mutual stability and to the development that the EU and African countries are called upon to consolidate and to which they must remain actively committed. Assistance to countries from which migratory flows originate must be greatly intensified to improve their socioeconomic conditions as a first crucial step toward curbing this phenomenon. This in addition, of course, to our duty of showing solidarity toward countries in difficulty. Beyond these positive developments, we must not, however, forget that the main source of instability at Europe's borders come from political, economic, and institutional arrangement in the Middle East, for which, in addition to violent new crises, there has unfortunately yet to be a satisfactory balancing point, starting with the Israeli-Palestinian question. A strong unity of intent among the Atlantic allies is indispensable to building on convergences, especially in the Syrian-Iraqi scenario, with other stakeholders, such as the Russian Federation and Iran, in order to more rapidly stabilize a conflict fueled by all of the main tensions in the region. Clashes between interpretations of Islam, between central and rebel powers, between calls for democracy and autocratic regimes, between transparency and powers vulnerable to corruption. The clear difficulties of the international community to bring to a close interminable negotiations on low-intensity conflicts, as well as the Iraqi and Syrian crises, have created fertile ground for resurgence of ancient ambitions of regional supremacy, a further destabilizing factor. The ongoing conflict in the Gulf region is only one example. At an economic juncture in which the low cost of raw materials makes the economic future of many countries in the area more uncertain than it was only a few years ago. To the international community, we ask, first of all, for the sake of the peoples of the region who continue to be victimized by a crisis that in a few short years has generated millions of refugees, too many victims, concrete action based on a long-term strategy that will create a new lasting balance among all of the stakeholders. This is why it is important to consider for a moment the genesis of the great hopes raised, and mostly disappointed, during the period we call the Arab Spring. The just claims that propelled these movements were born of the authentic need for better protection of individual rights and freedoms, including the right to employment, to a dignified existence for oneself and one's family. In addition to material reconstruction, we need to plan the necessary reconstruction of the social fabric devastated by conflicts. We can defeat terrorism and Daesh by deploying a wide range of tools, from the use of force to cooperation with our allies in the region, from pressures on the parties to a conflict to sanctions, but especially by offering a future of hope. There will always be an after, and it is during this after that we should continue to work to assure the rights and protections that so many Syrians, Afghanis, and Somalis hope to attain by immigrating to Europe, risking their lives, and what is even more important and terrifying, the lives of their children, who far too often drown in the Mediterranean. This is a question that I have already addressed in another part of this conversation. We are living in a very complex moment in which, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, Europe is confronted by a twofold challenge. Within Europe, the integration process that only a few years ago reached its zenith with the launch of the single currency is slowing down, both in terms of completing the structures for economic governance and in terms of the free circulation of its citizens. At the level of the external threat, the foreign and defense policy of Europe and of its member states often overlap, and not always in a consistent manner. Here, too, we have reached a transitional moment with common structures that are developing, but that still need time to be established definitively. The weight of these crises, however, demand immediate responses. There are many who believe that today's crises have ushered Europe into a period of distrust in its ability to promote a vision, a design that is shared among its peoples. The difficulties are not insurmountable. Instead, we must work to transform them into a positive force for greater and better integration. Jean Monnet, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, often asserted that, and I quote, "Europe will be forged in crises, and it will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises." His words have not lost their relevance. Renewing its forces, and thereby also renewing its leadership capacity, is a duty for the European Union. In 2015, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and commemorated the centenary of the start of the First World War, two global tragedies born in Europe, from whose immense suffering the idea of Europe was born, grew and took root. A Europe that would unite rather than fight, a project to whose inception the United States of America made a decisive contribution. The United States, at different moments of its history, has taken on a fundamental leadership role at the head of free countries. Washington's leadership, whether through President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points in 1918 or the 1941 Atlantic Charter signed by Roosevelt together with Winston Churchill, has been decisive in creating a more just international order. The support of the United States was crucial after the conclusion of the Second World War in helping to find a new European balance, endorsing the ideals of visionary leaders such as de Gasperi, Adenauer, Schuman, Monnet, Spock, and Spinelli. The European Union is the end result of a long, vital process. Its progressive integration has allowed Europeans to live a truly unique period of peace and social and cultural economic development, and to create an area of attraction that has become precious, as demonstrated most recently by the events that ensued after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This history has produced rights and increased protections for all. It has generated security and offered a model of pluralistic coexistence. These are accomplishments that we must not sacrifice. In the multipolar world in which we live, the Atlantic Partnership continues to be an essential point of reference. And in this framework, Europe must shoulder its responsibilities. In this context, the European Union cannot succumb to the temptation to weaken its cohesiveness. The elements of instability on its borders demand, on the contrary, a strengthening of active neighborhood policies, of foreign and defense policies. They demand the activation of fruitful collaboration with the regional organizations on the African continent to achieve a common future. Today, the United States and the European Union, the transatlantic community, are being asked to demonstrate leadership that is true to their common tradition. In this general framework, Italy is operating consistently according to the basic principles that inspire its foreign policy: advocacy of Europe, multilateralism, Atlantic alliance, to address and help solve the problems we are facing today with conviction and a proactive spirit. Italy is going through a period of both political and economic change. After years of debate, the Parliament is about to approve definitively an important reform of the Constitution that will turn the role of the Senate from a second political chamber with the same attributes as the Chamber of Deputies into an assembly that represents the regions and local authorities. In the past few months, other important provisions have entered into force: a major reform of the labor market, a reform of the educational system, a reform of public administration that is gradually being enacted, which will increase the efficiency of the state apparatus, an improvement of the taxation system that aims to reduce tax evasion and avoidance, strengthening relations between citizens, businesses, and the state, a reform of the social security system, and the partly realized reform of justice. These are steps that are enabling a significant recovery of efficiency and competitiveness in our country, whose economy has not coincidentally returned to growth in 2015, and, according to the most reliable forecasts, will consolidate this growth in 2016. Even in the moments of greatest economic difficulty, Italy never fell short of its commitment to international peace and security. We are present in all of the main crisis areas, from Afghanistan to Iraq, Somalia to Lebanon, Kosovo to the Mediterranean, and in the Horn of Africa to fight piracy on the Indian Ocean. We are seated at the most important negotiating tables. I am thinking of Syria, Libya, and the coordination of the anti-Daesh coalition. At the European level, Italy will continue to propose one of the most innovative policies on integration, of growing integration, in coordination with partners who share our vision. Financial turbulence, political and humanitarian crises overlap in a mix of centrifugal drives that it is imperative to balance and, above all, to govern. We must be equal to this task, engaging in intelligent and decisive action. And we must do it together, showing the continued relevance of our principles, the courage of our ideas, the force of our democracies, the solidity of our institutions. This is the idea of leadership that Italy advocates, a collegial leadership of ideas and values that help day after day to bring together in a trusting and fruitful debate our partners and allies in the daily commitment to the peace, to the stability, and to the prosperity of all peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grazie, signor Presidente. I am Alessandra Casella. I'm a professor of economics here at Columbia, and I'm here to moderate the question and answer session. I believe that we have about 15 minutes for question and answers. I will be speaking English. Mi hanno chiesto di parlare inglese, quindi parlerò inglese, ma naturalmente sono qui per qualunque precisazione. I will begin by collecting a few questions. There are two microphones on the two sides, and I'm asking those of you who have questions for President Mattarella to line up on those two microphones. While you do that, I will begin with one question myself, which has to do with the refugee crisis. So seen from here, we see, of course, the humanitarian tragedy. We see the short-run challenges, political, social, logistical. But we also see a real opportunity for Europe in the medium and long term. If we look at the numbers, Europe is getting older. Its economies are in need of a fiscal expansion, a public investment expansion. Many of the refugees are skilled. The numbers are not such to threaten a population of 500 million. And in addition, Europe, I think, really needs a new idea, an ideal. It has lost, at least in the popular imagination, almost its reason for being. Right? All the discussion about European Union in the last years have been about fiscal austerity. This is not what the population should hear. So I am surprised that so little of the public discourse, what we see in the media, highlights these positive sides. Everything we hear or we read is about a crisis. It's something apocalyptic. It's the NATO boats that are monitoring the Aegean. Is there any effort to stress the positive side, to educate the populations too about this? So this is my question. And I will now begin taking questions, please.
Hello, President Mattarella, and welcome again to Colombia. Thank you for your illuminating talk on the importance of cooperation. My question is also related to Professor Casella's question. Even though the discourse at the international level, at the Europe level, might be positive, even if we reach that stage, the lived experiences of migrants and refugees might be different. So how do we ensure that European leadership can prevent that racism and xenophobia to integrate refugees in Europe?
Thank you very much. I'll ask.
Thank you, President Mattarella, for your inspiring speech. My question is regarding the European answer with regards to the Syrian and Iraqi crisis. You've spoken a lot about how there was a common united response with regards to the reconstruction of Libya. And I would like to know what you think a European common answer could be to the Syrian and Iraqi crisis. Thank you.
I suggest we take two more questions, and then I will turn to President Mattarella, so please.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Camilo Vacirca. My mother and grandfather are both from Roma. My great-grandmother is from Udine, and my great-grandmother is from Trapani. So I'm a full-blood Italian-American, so it's very nice to see a fellow countryman. My question is relating to, again, to the migrant crisis, especially with the partnership with Turkey and how effective that is in combating the migrant crisis, especially reaching with deals in Brussels and the EU, and just how can we stipulate that, especially recently with NATO deploying into the Aegean Sea and patrol boats trying to stop people smuggling. Is an increased insecurity in that region essential to stop the flow of illegal people smuggling in the Aegean Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, President Mattarella, for being here. Thank you for your speech. I'm an Italian citizen, also an American citizen, who's currently studying here at Columbia University. And my question for you is, what do you think is the current status of the European populations? What would we say today to those wonderful dreamers of the past, like Altiero Spinelli, who you mentioned, who dreamed of a United States of Europe? And I find it really funny that being a student here, I am very often labeled as a European student, which I'm really, really proud of, and I'm always really, really happy of. But I think especially at home, we would sometimes dream of being called European, right? We identify ourselves first as Italian, as French, as Spanish, as German. And you talked about leadership and of the united and collective intentions and values of Europe, and how important that is at a leadership level to have a collective discussion about the topics today. How do you think we can also extend this discussion to the population as a whole, to the identity of the different nationalities as European in addition to Italian or Spanish or German within the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. President Mattarella, would you like to answer some of the questions?
These are all very interesting questions, and let me begin with the one on refugees. I agree with what you have said. As I mentioned earlier, the scope of migratory flows in Europe is not such that we are running who knows what kind of risk, because I think that we can take them in without really being traumatized. Now, compared to what's happened in the United States, for example, or compared to what happens in economically weak countries in the Middle East. They have to take in so many refugees, Lebanon being one of them. And these people coming into Europe, therefore, should not disrupt the Union. So why are we seeing this reaction all over Europe, in the public opinion, in the governments? Why is there this narrow-minded approach? Many public opinions and many governments were ill-prepared. They were not expecting such a far-reaching impact. And it is difficult at times when the impact is so quick to be wise and balanced in governing it. We fear for our security, and we must realize instead that there can be benefits. Many European countries have a very low birth rate, and to have migrants would not at all be a bad idea. It would actually be a useful contribution for many countries. Furthermore, it is quite surprising to see how some believe that all you have to do is shut your borders. It's as if we were, centuries back in time. It's as if by closing borders, we could elude ourselves into believing that what happens elsewhere is not going to happen to us. None of this closing of borders is going to be effective. We have to govern the phenomenon in an evenly balanced way, with rules, with solidarity, and with intelligence and compassion. We see the images on television. We see what's behind migration. There are people who are leaving their homes, their lands, because they can no longer stay there, either because there are wars. Aleppo, for example, right now is under a bombing campaign, and there are persecutions. And this is another reason why people flee, or people are hungry, and they have to flee in order to survive. There are countries who claim to be civilized, and therefore they cannot ignore those conditions. What is possible instead is to govern the phenomenon with wisdom. Now, clearly, that means that Europe, as we just heard, has to be up to the task and has to be able to abide by the intuition of the Founding Fathers. And just a few years after the Second World War, in 1949, the Founding Fathers gave birth to the first form of integration, the coal and steel community in Europe. And that was one of the reasons why the war broke out. And 4 years had elapsed since the end of the war. And yet they were wise enough, they were farsighted enough and courageous enough to be able to initiate that process, which has resulted in what we see today. And it would be paradoxical for this European integration model that is viewed in many areas of the world and imitated from South America to the Southeast Asia, where we see forms of regional, supranational integration. And it would be very odd for it to now break down and force Europe to relinquish any positive role in the future world. Well, in economic terms, after the crisis, Europe needed to adopt austerity measures, of course. But I think that right now people need to realize in Europe that we need an expansionary policy. The U.S., in fact, has been able to rekindle growth and employment. And in Europe, we need a policy which can, in fact, encourage investment policies and a rise in employment. On the issue of Syria and Iraq now, well, clearly, there may be the need for some sort of military effort in order to counter and stop the barbaric attacks of the caliphate. But we also need shared solutions. All the populations concerned have to come on board. This is the effort that is needed. In Iraq, the government needs to become stable once again, including the Sunni segments. All of the Iraqi communities, Sunni and Shia, have to be able to identify with the state and cooperate with one another. This is what would bring stability to the country and help it to counter terrorism. And likewise in Syria, there is an ongoing effort being put in place by the U.S. and European countries, and they're all involved, Italy, of course, being one of them. All the main players should be sitting around the table, and this is what happened just a few weeks ago. It is important for these main players to work with the Syrians. They, in fact, are the ones who have to be there. Otherwise, nothing can work. There has to be a shared agreement, and that is a basic rule in Iraq, in Syria, and Libya. It is not possible to impose solutions. Otherwise, the negotiations will result in a stalemate. So the populations concerned, they have the sovereignty that is needed to determine their future. We have to help them to come up with shared solutions which can lead to bringing peace and stability. We had two more questions. Let me try to answer those in just a couple of seconds. Racism and xenophobia are dangers that are always lurking. At times they seem to disappear, but they're just silent and they return, they reemerge. We have a World Day against these phenomena, and we always try to remember what's happened in the past because of racism and xenophobia to prevent that from happening again. And I don't think that Europe is running that risk now, even though within Europe there are some movements that appear now and again of this kind. But I would say that overall Europe will not allow this to grow. The partnership with Turkey, is it effective, you asked me? That's a very interesting question. I hope it will be. I don't have a definite answer because, unfortunately, I am not a fortune teller. I cannot forecast the future. But in any case, Turkey is the point of transit for many refugees going to Greece, through the Balkans, to Northern Europe, and even Italy, the southern shores of Italy. It isn't a question of closing the borders to keep the refugees out and let them suffer in the cold in makeshift refugee camps. No, we have to take them in and regulate the phenomenon in a humane way. And I think that the role of Turkey is very important in this respect. And I hope, and this is what would appear to be happening, according to our contacts, we think that this cooperation is effective. In the Aegean Sea, yes, many children are drowning. They are not NATO vessels, as a matter of fact. Let me just say something here. In the Mediterranean, many people are drowning, many children. And after the great emotion for Aylan, whose body was found on the Turkish beach, every day we get news about children who are drowning, and there seems to be generalized indifference to this fact. So let me just say this, and I feel very proud that our seamen, our Navy, over the years have been working along the routes from North Africa to Italy. They've saved hundreds of thousands of human lives, women, men, children. And I think this has to be done a bit better, even in the Aegean Sea, because we have so many people coming across, and it is very dangerous. The European Union has launched a mission with many countries on board. It is well organized. We have to be better at saving human lives.
President Mattarella will need to leave at 11, and so we have 5 minutes. Therefore, I suggest we have one very brief question, maybe two very brief questions, and then we'll ask for, I'm afraid, a brief answer.
Hello, President Mattarella. It's a great pleasure and privilege to see you here. I am Turkish student, and what I want to learn, you are stating that cooperation with Turkey is increasing. I grew up with understanding that Turkey's dream of entering European Union has been becoming zero because of diverging values. Does this cooperation means there is a possibility because of the refugee crisis that Turkey might once again enter this process of European Union?
Hello, I'm Andrew DeAngelis. I'm an Italian student in Columbia College, and I'll ask my question in Italian. Buongiorno, Presidente.
Good morning, Mr. President. As you mentioned just a moment ago, Italy is about to approve the most important constitutional reform in its history since the adoption of the Constitution in 1946. And the reform is clearly going to have a huge impact on the way Italy will manage the migration crisis and its foreign policy. At the same time, the parliament that's going to have to adopt the reform was elected under a law that was then declared to be unconstitutional, and it is a parliament in which there are many members of parliament who are under investigation or have been convicted. So I would like to know what you think about that.
We now have 5 minutes to address
Grazie.
Turkey in the European Union and constitutional reform, please.
Volentieri.
Yes, I'd be happy to answer. On Turkey's accession and negotiation, therefore, for accession to the European Union, well, this has been an ongoing process, and Italy, I can say, has always been in favor of Turkey's accession. Not all EU countries agree with this. Some had reservations, and some had perplexities and concerns, but I must say that Italy has always been in favor of it. The negotiations have now resumed. Well, there is a need that needs to be considered. Turkey and all the other countries that are negotiating their accession, so Serbia and other countries in the Balkan region, need to conform to European standards of living and norms. And I'm talking here about many different areas: human rights, democracy, freedom of the press, economy, and market conditions, and I'm thinking of culture. So there are so many different areas in our society where there are European Union standards, and therefore in order to successfully finalize the accession negotiations, these standards have to be met by the candidate countries, and hopefully this is what will happen for Turkey. So that is Italy's position. On the constitutional reform, well, let me just tell you that there aren't many members of parliament in Italy who are under investigation. Those are exceptional circumstances. If you consider the total number, I mean, about 1,000 MPs, that's a very small number. So the parliament was elected 3 years ago under a law that was declared by the Constitutional Court to be illegitimate. To tell you the truth, I was a member of the Constitutional Court when that happened. I was a judge on the Constitutional Court at the time. But we wrote, and of course we were duty-bound because of our Constitution, to say that that decision did not invalidate the electoral outcome. It was something that was to be considered for the future elections. So it wasn't there to undermine the institutions. That never happens because we always have to ensure continuity of our institutions in order to make sure that we always have a sound and solid constitutional or institutional order. Now, I don't know if this is how this is going to impact the migration governance. Clearly, it's going to have an impact on our decision-making process. It's going to be faster. We're going to be able to govern issues, not belatedly, but when they first arise. And let me just add one more final point before I wrap up. I wish to thank you all for giving me the honor today to speak in this wonderful university. And on the issue of refugees, Italy is defending a need. There are many people coming from Afghanistan, Africa, and the Middle East, and they come to Europe because they see Europe as being a place of freedom, democracy, the protection of human rights and countries where they can freely determine their lives. This is a reason for great pride in Europe. It cannot be a reason why people want to destroy the image of Europe and make it less attractive. Europe has to continue being what it is and how it is, in fact, viewed by the migrants and the refugees. Thank you very much.